is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. I asked him where he was going to get his author headshot done. He said, definitely not Sears. Stu Horvath.
I guess I'm going to have to put the author photos for this book in the show notes.
You might have to. How you doing today, Stu?
Pretty good, pretty good.
So, Stu, speaking of great author headshots, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about, before I tell you, periodically you'll hear me say, there's always something new to find, something weird, something strange. And when I find it, it just instantly becomes my favorite thing of all time. Like, RPGs just keep giving up the weird old stuff. And this might be the weirdest of the oldest stuff.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I definitely had a friend recently, and by recently, because remember, there was the before times. So I had a friend in the before times who asked me, like, well, what happens? How many episodes are you going to be able to do with this show? There's only, like, so many products that, like, TSR and Dungeons & Dragons put out. And I was like, bro, there are more RPGs out there than just Dungeons & Dragons.
For real.
Yeah. So for this episode, we're going to talk about one that is a little left of center, something that I know I definitely never heard of, and I know you had not found until you actually discovered it. What's it called, Stu?
World Action and Adventure by Gregory L. Kinney, published in 1985 by his mom.
Oh my God. I love everything about this. I mean, I would dare say we end the episode right now because we've peaked. There's nothing that sounds better, because right there, everything that you described, author's name, awesome. Name of the book, awesome. The fact that it was published by his mom means that it was published and made with love, and she was so proud of him. And, like, I'm proud of him too because his mom's proud of him. So this is great.
So a little bit of backstory. Greg Stafford's widow has been selling some of Greg's stuff on eBay, and I found it by happenstance. I was looking for Different World magazines. I got a bunch of those, but then she was also selling this, which was their copy, which was bought at a convention from Gregory Kinney's mom. And I don't know where to start, dude.
Well, let me tag in real quick, so I'm going to give you a minute to figure out where to start. I'm going to unpack all of that you just said. First and foremost, folks, we're willing to talk about the Stafford's collection being auctioned off by the widow because, spoilers, Stu bought it all.
No, I didn't. I just bought all the stuff that was up at that particular moment in time. I'm sure there's more stuff going up bit by bit.
It won't be by the time this episode airs because Stu will have bought it all.
Yeah.
The other thing that I love is that you got to buy something that was in the actual collection of RPG books of your hero in RPGs, Greg Stafford,
Yep.
which is such an amazing thing. Like, I imagine for people who are huge D&D fans, the idea of owning something that once belonged to Gygax, the creator of such amazing games as Dungeons & Dragons, y'all knew that, but I needed to make that statement for you. That's got to be pretty cool. So for you, owning something that once belonged and was played by Greg Stafford has to be so cool.
Yeah, and flipping through the book, one of his business cards from the 80s is in there, and I was just like, oh, so cool.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. And then
Yeah.
my final thing that I'm going to unpack is, let's be realistic, folks. If I go to a convention, and I really miss going to conventions, and I know many of our listeners miss going to conventions too. I'm getting the warm and fuzzies thinking about being back at Gen Con or being at PAX Unplugged and the cool thing of, like, running into people. And I am in the sales business. I've been in the sales business. I love people when they try to pitch me something, and you can see their enthusiastic nature about the product they're selling. I'm going to tell you right now, nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to be more enthusiastic for selling your shit than your mom. And then me, as a seasoned veteran of sales, like, I know the pitch. I know when it's coming. I know where it's going. How could I say no to someone's mom? I mean, God, of course I'm going to buy these books. And of course Greg Stafford was powerless to stop himself from buying these books. So, Stu, tell us about these books.
So it's a set of 3. You have the core rule book, which is just called World Action and Adventure Official Guide. And then you have the World Action and Adventure Actors Book of Characters and the World Action and Adventure Animals and Geography book.
Oh, God, it's so cool.
There's something very mid-'80s textbook about the approach and aesthetic to these books. The cover is basically repurposed clip art, which I don't know if you're familiar with like the 80s sort of clip art illustrations. They just have a very specific feel and I love them. It's a little jarring to see them on the cover of a role-playing book.
Well, yeah, because that would be like my social studies book, what I would have back in the day in like the 4th or 5th grade. But there is something very like reassuring and comforting about that.
Yeah.
Something very safe.
Yeah. These came out in 1985, but these are solid hardcover books. They are of higher quality, I would say, than most of the TSR Dungeons & Dragons hardcovers at the time. Like, these spines are in no danger of peeling off or cracking. Paper stock is good. This is a mighty fine piece of independent publishing.
And if I'm wrong, correct me, but the picture that you sent, it looked like it had that like thick, puffy-ish cover.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
love
puffy
that.
and it sort of has like a gloss to it. We're getting closer to talking about the substance here, but we got to take the slow way around so you fully appreciate the scope of this picture. There's a lot of words on the back of each of the books, but the important ones feature on all 3 books, and it says, quote, "For the accomplishment of writing the World Action and Adventure series, 5 departments at San Diego State University awarded Gregory L. Kinney 15 units of credit in 5 departments: English, sociology, zoology, psychology, and multicultural education."
Okay, hold on. So, like, that is such an 80s thing. It's like this cool kid comes up and he's like, hey, I know I'm supposed to be going to college and learning what you want to teach me, but what if I handed you this book that shows that I already know everything? And then they're all like, oh, Gregory, you're so cool. And he like pops the collars up on his polo shirt, and then he puts his leather jacket on over that polo shirt, and he's like, yeah, man, here's my book and why you should give me credit for like English, sociology, social studies, animal handling, and like, journalism is because here. And also, if you want to throw in something for game design as well, I'm cool with it. And he puts on his Ray-Bans, and he kind of just eases his way out of the room. I mean, that's how I imagine it was going to go down. But like, much respect to him as a human being who's like, well, yeah, this is why I know all this stuff here. And here's 3 volumes of it. My mom will give you some change.
I respect Gregory's hustle so much. Like, and he wrote all of these books and he did a lot of the art in them. And the sad thing is that I'm not sure that there's a game here.
Okay.
So what World Action and Adventure is, it's sort of a universal system in that you can play any kind of scenario in here as long as it's sort of contained within what we understand the real world to be. So no magic, no laser guns, no monsters. This is literally a role-playing game that is translating the real world into, a role-playing game system.
Okay. So if you wanted to say play Magnum PI, you could use this game to hop around the island and be a private investigator.
Yeah, you could, in theory. It would take a lot of work on the part of the person running the game to kind of get there. So the game is sort of structured around like all of these charts in which Gregory kind of takes everything that he can think of about the world and just translates them into, random tables for a role-playing game, which is an incredible undertaking because there's such a fine-grained level of detail. There's a random table in the character book of like 187 different careers that are under miscellaneous careers.
What? That's a lot of jobs.
But that's all they are. It's just a list of jobs. Like, there's nothing intrinsic to them, It's like postman, dean, dietitian. Like,
Well, he put the dean in there because he was angling for those credits. So I respect that. I understand that.
but like, there are more interesting professionals that are sort of tied to like military or like detectives. There's like businessmen, but like it's all just lists and there's no context, no stuff for you to latch on to fire your imagination. Like, I do kind of want to play a game where we're all mailmen or like electricians, right? Okay, I'm going to dial this back just slightly. Have you seen House 2?
Who hasn't seen House 2? I would dare say that might be my preferred House movie.
It is definitely my preferred House movie. But the thing that made me love House 2, so it's like this house with interdimensional portals and weird stuff happens constantly. So they're having this problem with the electricity, and the electrician comes, and it's Cliff Clavin from Cheers.
I love it.
He's got the mustache and the overalls, but like he gets wrapped up in, the weirdness of the house, and he's also basically Indiana Jones. He winds up in like an Aztec temple inside the walls of the house, and like they rescue the virgin sacrifice, and everyone just accepts the bizarreness of this situation and no one questions it. And I want to play that role-playing game. And you probably could play that role-playing game with World Action and Adventure, but there's no framework to kind of bring that game out.
Well, I think that sounds more to me like you would need a talented game master, because he puts 188, you said, roles in the back of the book, or jobs or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it would take like a talented game master to be like, you could be a postman. You could be the dean. Well, what if the dean was the dean of Miskatonic University? Or what if the postman was Cliff Clavin from House 2? Or this is just your dog groomer. But like, what if he was the dog groomer for Cerebus? Like, there's a lot you could do in that framework. And sometimes having just a list of different jobs is a good way to get the old Inspirato engine going in the little gray cells in your brain.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's how my brain started working when I was looking through the rules. I'm trying to put it all together, as I'm reading it into a compelling kind of game. The problem is that most role-playing games support you in this endeavor. World Action and Adventure just gives you lists. And like, yeah, so the dog groomer, grooms Cerebus. And like, that's a great idea.
Thank you. I'm a very talented game master.
But there's literally no signposting for how to like kind of make that happen in the game.
Are there dice? Is there like damage charts?
Yeah, it's all very rudimentary, I think is the word that I would use. The basic version of the combat is just a 6-sided die. You just roll the die against a chart, and the chart tells you if you hit, and then there's a second chart to see, what you hit and how badly. There's a more complicated one that has sort of a combat matrix that's similar to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. None of the systems are particularly interesting or complicated, nor are they really interconnected,
Right.
There's just all these different charts that you could roll on, which I love charts. I love random charts, but obviously he's not a game designer is what I'm really kind of getting at. And even for the, 1 decade in, like, there's far more sophisticated systems out there for this kind of stuff. But its failing as a role-playing game system is sort of negligible. Like, nobody in 2020 is going to buy this game and really, like, commit to playing it, right? But what it is that's fascinating is that it winds up being sort of a system agnostic source book for the real world circa 1985 because he just sort of dumps all of this stuff into it. And like, it's just really fascinating. It is so detailed. And God, there's more there's poetry.
No.
It's filled with poems.
Like mid-80s level Morrissey style poetry? Or like, what are we talking about here?
So the first thing that you get after you get past like the forward and the introduction is a poem by Gregory L. Kinney named World Action and Adventure, which is a 20-verse poem.
Well.
And I'll just...
Don't leave our listeners in the dark. They want to know, and I want to know.
The last stanza is, quote, "With World Action and Adventure, there is one thing that is sure. In any time and every place, it's here for all the human race."
God dang it. So he wrote his own like 80s style, like, this is the song that we're going to do, like the Fat Boys, Let's Get Ready for Freddy. So we are going to tell you the entire story of the movie as like a promotional tool for this movie, or at least for when they are wrapping up the movie, it's kind of a, hey, so in case you missed anything, here's the Fat Boys.
Every stanza is basically an exclamation of one aspect of adventure, in case you didn't know what adventure was like.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, a tiger stares upon the flock comprised of very meaty stock. With 5 long strides, it kills a beast and carries off his fresh-caught feast.
My God.
It's not great, but it's not bad either. Like, it's really hard to, like, rag on this. And I think that that's sort of the appeal, is that there's, like, this profound niceness to the game.
See, I'm looking at this at a completely different way. I'm looking at this as it is 1985. Dungeons and Dragons is arguably bigger than it's ever been. I mean, this is like the heyday of Dungeons and Dragons. We're like a couple years removed with the D&D cartoon. Like, people know what Dungeons and Dragons is. And here's this dude who's like, you know what? I could probably write an adventure for the world's greatest role-playing game. But I'm going to go my own way with it. And, Call of Cthulhu's out at this point, right? And he's probably like, I could write a Call of Cthulhu adventure and just, put it over the plate. There is a actual fan base for both products, but he goes his own way. He is a maverick who goes his own way, who from the ground up writes an entire RPG system. And he doesn't write one book. He doesn't write 2 books. He writes 3 books, each one with a more exciting and endearing author photo on the back than the last.
It's true that you have Yachting Greg, you have
Yeah.
Suit and Tie Greg, and then you have Indiana Jones Greg.
I mean, knowing what Tinder is now, like these are 3 great opportunities for you to have either swiped left or right on Gregory L. Kinney in the 80s. Like he let you know he's more than just a yacht guy. He is more than just a suit and tie guy. He's into whips and leather and adventure.
One thing that I can't really gauge is how old a gentleman he was when these came out. I mean, obviously he got college credit, so he's older than 17, 18. But judging from the yachting photo and the forehead creases that indicate his sensitivity, I would say that he was in his late 20s. I mean, maybe? I don't know. But then if you look at the Indiana Jones photo, I guess maybe cosplaying as Harrison Ford makes you look like a child playing dress up at all times. And he looks like 15 in that one, maybe 16.
Yeah, I mean, because let's face it, Harrison Ford looked old when he was young.
Yeah.
Just grizzled. Like he's seen some stuff.
Lassoing the cattle all day long, a cowboy sings an old folk song that tells a tale of untamed lands as he stomps his feet and claps his hands.
Man, I'm sold. I know with everything being what it is and playing over Discord, I feel like we need to roll the dice one night and just try this game out, try to put an adventure together. We owe it to our listeners to give this a go because this is amazing.
It's something. I have to be honest, trying to read the rules really defeats me. There's too many tables that have too many numbers and abbreviations on them for me to easily parse. And like I said, nothing feels connected. Like there's an organizational problem in the book that a lot of indie folks working on their own kind of run into. You're just worried about making the thing, and you're not worried so much about, making it so other people could use it. That makes it hard to use.
Well, and also we've had 30 years worth of game development since these books have come out. So it's not that people have learned to reinvent the wheel. They've just come up with their own forms of transportation. They've learned how to streamline things. They've seen what works. They've seen what doesn't work. They've had enough of looking back to the past and seeing like why things failed. I mean, there's tons of great ideas out there that just aren't well executed. And maybe this is one of them. However, the fact that he went for it the way he did, like, it doesn't sound like he's read a player's handbook and was like, okay, I see how this is organized. I'll just do the same thing, but with my own game. Like, kudos to him, man. That's a big energy there.
In fairness, I was recently looking through the rules for the original White Box D&D, and I want to throw it across the room. Like, it's a great piece of history, but like, I don't understand how people played that game because it's just so dense. And I mean that not in like it's an encyclopedia. I mean that like there are dumb choices that were made in the making of that book. And like, yeah, 10 years on, they were still figuring that out. And it's hard. We live in a post old school essentials world, like with those heads up displays and that clean user interface. Like those are designed specifically to make the books as usable as possible. I find myself having difficulty with older role playing texts and just trying to figure them out because it's just like, oh God, it's so hard to parse.
Yeah, me too. The user experience on a lot of older games has definitely left me like, I don't even want to play this. Like, I want to skim it enough to know what I'm doing, and then I'm just going to make the rest up. Whereas nowadays, you do have a pretty good UX on a lot of games, and I think that's a really cool and really important thing.
And yeah, even like Call of Cthulhu stuff, I've been running the Call of Cthulhu. I think I might have mentioned this, but like putting adventures in prose, like they're fun to read as like the person running the game, but like in terms of actually running the game, it's really hard to pull the adventure out of paragraphs. I want everything to be in bullet points now. And they're so much more usable than they used to be at, highlighting information and breaking stuff out, but it's still like, oh God, this is frustrating, So we have come a long way is what I'm saying. And it's hard to judge Greg by our modern standards because of that. I think he did a good job.
Here, here. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on World Action and Adventure?
I highly recommend trying to track this thing down. I don't know if it exists in any kind of PDF form or modern form, but like they're just such genuine books. There's no guile really in them. They just feel like a kid wanted to make a very specific RPG because he's fascinated with the world he lives in. I like the naivety that is intrinsic in that decision that he made to make a role-playing game in the real world, because I think that he thinks, or he thought at that time, that the real world was a wonderful place. And that's a nice thing. That's a positive thing.
Absolutely, man. And you know, we clown on a lot of stuff here because we have to keep you entertained for the amount of time you're listening to this podcast. We both think this game is pretty cool, and we think the idea of what he did is really impressive. And also, I gotta say, you know, I was talking about the mom being the best salesperson. Not everyone has supportive parents. Not everyone has an adult figure in their life who's really willing to get behind what kind of creative endeavor a kid has and really go to the mat for them. So shout out to Greg's mom. That is awesome that you were so hands-on and so involved in his development of his game. And also, folks, if you got a cool parent out there, cool aunt and uncle, cool adult figure in your life that like has supported you when you were a creative person, think about giving them a shout, especially now that we got some wacky stuff going on in the world. They'll always be happy to hear from you.
That's true.
Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram, posting every day about, honestly, about role-playing games that are less weird than this one.
It's true. You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about board games. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. You can follow my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life over on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. If you like the podcast, please go and rate, review, and subscribe to this show. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. If you really like the podcast, we've got an awesome Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. where you can find videos, early release episodes of the show, a private Discord server just for the patrons. Stu is in the process of writing a book, so you get some behind the scenes on that. I'm in the process of writing a game. You get behind the scenes on that as well. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.